lives floating at the surface, a death sentence for the future of the species.
My sense is that these things laid eggs that were at the surface. They were in the plankton, tiny little ammonites living in the top 2 inches of the sea. They have little air chambers, and they sort of float around happily until, of course, all hell breaks loose, and the top part of the sea goes dark and goes acid and eats their little shells off. It kills them off.
Any species that raises its young here is now doomed. But some find ways to make sure their offspring survive. Sharks will make it through this massacre. In fact, these resilient creatures have survived numerous mass extinctions, though the details are shocking. Many sharks give birth to live young, but some play host to intrauterine cannibalism. While still in the womb, the shark pups actually prey on each other, ensuring only the hardiest survive. It's a brutal illustration of Darwin's survival of the fittest, but it's helped them survive for over 400 million years, while many others have become extinct. It's only day 5. And while those still alive are clamoring for protection from the deluge of acid rain, another plague draws near. Huge amounts of debris linger in the atmosphere, slowly spreading from pole to pole. Soon the entire globe will become pitch black.
Now, how long that darkness persisted is hard to say. There's one very telling thing about darkness and the impact, which is that if we look at the plankton, the groups of plankton in the ocean that went extinct and the ones that survived are the ones that can tolerate a period of darkness lasting for days or weeks. The ones that went extinct are the ones that need relatively constant sunlight. So this is really good evidence that the effects were global and total, and that the darkness lasted for some time.
What we can tell about dinosaurs is they were very visual animals. We do know that. We know that they didn't have particularly good senses of smell, and we know that they had reasonably good senses of hearing. So you're dealing with animals that depend upon hearing and sight for their behavior. And now someone shuts out the lights.
For the dinosaurs, it is a terrifying new reality. Even at high noon, it felt like midnight. To see anything other than the dark abyss, you'd need night vision goggles. In what is now Alberta, Canada, a lone Tyrannosaurus rex searches for food. He's weak with hunger. A broken leg has slowed him down. But the darkness actually gives him a critical advantage. An excellent sense of smell guides him to prey. And with the lights out, they're utterly defenseless. A herd of Triceratops is nearby. It's so dark, they can't even see the ground, much less find plants to graze on.
If you're an herbivore that relies on sight, then you're really going to have a difficult time finding food. If you happen to bump into a stand of what you eat, that's great. But if you don't bump into that stand, then you don't eat.
The hobbled T-Rex closes in and snags his meal. He savors the taste of fresh meat. But this will be his last. In this harsh world, a wounded animal can't last long. 2 months pass, and there's no relief from the darkness. It's driven many dinosaurs insane.
Any animal that has a brain can go crazy, and dinosaurs certainly had brains and could certainly go crazy. But I think it's a fair statement to say that dinosaurs were more than smart enough to react to this, to remember it, to be affected by it in a permanent way.
But once again, it seems our ancestors are built to weather these relentless plagues.
Mammals had evolved through the age of dinosaurs as nocturnal organisms. So they had developed particular parts of their brain and their senses that allowed them to navigate during the night. So if you had a prolonged night resulting from this impact event, Purgatorius or any of the mammals that survived would have had an advantage.
As permanent midnight drags on, any vegetation spared by the fires now wilts in the darkness. Where once you'd find dinosaurs practically everywhere, now only a handful remain. The 4-month period of darkness drives all the plant-eating dinosaurs into extinction. Duck-billed dinosaurs, horned dinosaurs like Triceratops, and the long-necked sauropods.
These animals needed to eat a lot, so if they were not able to find sufficient amount of food within a relatively short period of time, that would have a tremendous impact in their populations. Not only by the fact that they would be weakened and that they eventually would starve, but also probably would have an impact in their reproductive rate.
These majestic creatures, which dominated every continent for over 130 million years, are now lost forever. The only thing that remains of these incredible creatures is their fossilized bones. One such skeleton is buried in the Badlands of North Dakota.
The site here is physically located about 15 meters below the KT boundary. And it's in a mudstone that represents the floodplain deposit. And so this represents a dinosaur that was washed either onto or died on the floodplain. And what we have is a disarticulated skeletal remain. Here we have a rib, pretty much the center of the rib cage, so we have the center part of the animal.
It takes many months of sometimes back-breaking labor to unearth an entire dinosaur skeleton, but the hard work pays off. Each fossil uncovered deepens our understanding of the ancient past and our own place in the history of life.
Some sort of like small plant material in there.
4 months after the impact, the sun begins to peek out of the gloom. The picture it reveals is not pretty. It's a shattered landscape, deformed and desolate. Just when it seems the worst is over, another plague is about to strike. Lethal, bone-chilling cold. Life on Earth is already hanging by a thread. How much more can it take before the whole planet succumbs? After 6 months, our once warm, nurturing planet has turned its back on life.
So all rules change, not just the biological rules, but the geological rules change. The way it rains changes, how much, the temperature, topsy-turvy.
Day in, day out, the dinosaurs can't escape.
I think it's fair to say that dinosaurs probably could survive a drop in temperature a little more than we might at first expect that they could. It wouldn't be unreasonable for the dinosaurs living in those north and south of the poles to have experienced freezing overnight, for example. So if cold was a factor, it must have been a cold that dinosaurs had never experienced before.
In what is now Mongolia, the landscape was once green and lush. Now it is an endless wasteland, dusted in acid snow, tinged pinkish red by the fallout. Velociraptors can't find shelter against the bitter cold. One protects a small nest of eggs, the only hope these creatures have for the future. Two starving females target the eggs and will kill the mother to get them. Survival trumps the maternal instinct. Their bellies will be full for now, but by killing the next generation, they only make it easier for their species to go extinct. It is now 7 months after the asteroid impact. The world is tattered and forbidding. But incredibly, some creatures seem fated to survive. One of these species is our ancient ancestor, Purgatorius. Cozy burrows insulate the little mammals from the bitter cold outside. And when it comes to food, Purgatorius is hardly finicky.
Mammals could be described as being scavengers. They weren't picky eaters at that time. And they probably needed that generalist type of behavior in order to survive any sort of catastrophe that came with that impact event.
A good modern generalist to use as an analog for mammals would be an opossum. You wouldn't really call an opossum a herbivore, you really wouldn't call it an insectivore, you wouldn't call it a detritivore, you'd call it an animal that eats what it can.
And so our ancient ancestor sustains itself when most other life is being snuffed out. Nine months after the impact, only a tiny remnant of the dinosaur population remains. The giant plant eaters like Triceratops and the Titanosaurs are long gone. But a few carnivores like T-Rex have managed to hang on, scavenging carcasses, eating anything they can find. But even these food sources are drying up. With nowhere else to turn, they're about to turn on themselves. In the western U.S., food for large meat eaters like Tyrannosaurus rex is non-existent. The only food source left is each other. Cannibalism drives the hopeless final act for Tyrannosaurus rex. In less than a year, the relentless plagues reduced this mighty species to a single bedraggled survivor. He's too weak to stand, but knows that if he lies down, he may never get up again. In this kill or be killed world, it is T-Rex who loses the final round. This species, one of the most powerful predators the world has ever known, is starved into extinction.
Extinction is more than the end of something with a long run in the past. Extinction is murdering everything that would have gone into the future. And extinction is more than killing that species, because that species likely would have given rise to another species, which would have given rise to some other species, which could have given rise to something else.
In just 1 year's time, our entire planet is nearly drained of life. Every dinosaur is now dead. Along with them, the marine reptiles like the mosasaur. In fact, the seas are virtually empty. Just a few species of fish and sharks remain. Winged reptiles called pterosaurs are wiped out as well.
Anything bigger than, say, a raccoon, up to a dog-sized, anything larger than that, died out. The smaller you were, the better chance you had, but even among the small, it was a lottery. 1 out of 11 mammals survives in the Montana region. That's pretty phenomenal. I mean, that's 11 of you and 10 are dead. That's terrible odds, except let's think of the dinosaurs, all dead. So 1 out of 11 sounds pretty good, really, if you're faced with complete extinction.
In the end, nearly 70% of all species on Earth are driven into extinction. But this figure masks the severity of this catastrophe. The actual number of lives lost is incomprehensible.
Conditions just were bad enough to kill off everything in most species. But a lot of surviving species might have gone from millions of individuals to a few dozen bedraggled survivors hanging on just by the skin of their teeth.
Earth is dangerously close to becoming a dead planet. Among the ashes, a single question remains. Did the angel of death pass over enough animals for the world to live again? A century after an asteroid struck our planet, the massive crater is now hidden underwater. But these are still lifeless seas.
The big marine reptiles are gone, most of the fish are gone, most of the plankton is gone. We go from this fabulous, rich, diverse world to a biological desert.
The land dwellers rebound more quickly. With the former masters of the planet wiped out, the survivors no longer have to worry about getting eaten, and their populations quickly multiply.
There are lots of little mammals because suddenly nothing's forcing them to stay in their burrows. There aren't packs of little dromaeosaurs, and there aren't little baby tyrannosaurs running around trying to scarf them up all the time.
Turtles themselves dig well deep into the mud, perhaps with the first flash. Some early turtle goes, uh-oh, down to the bottom of a pond, into the side, dig in, dig in, dig in. And some survive, and the same with the crocs. But the warm-blooded animals did terribly. If we believe the dinosaurs were warm-blooded, I happen to. They were large and warm-blooded, meaning they needed a lot of food all the time. You cannot really hibernate well if you're a warm-blooded.
For our ancient ancestor Purgatorius, it's the dawn of a whole new day. Once they only scavenged by night. Now they can venture out any time without fear. Once prey for the dinosaurs, they are now poised to take over. The meek really have inherited the Earth. The asteroid impact was the greatest single game changer in the history of life on Earth. And who's to say it couldn't happen again?
I think it points up the importance of random events in Earth history. Some things are destined to happen. Some things are not able to be avoided or changed. And some things are just random bolts out of the blue.
While modern technology would likely see another asteroid strike coming, there's still nothing we could do to stop it. A kingdom that ruled for 150 million years was wiped out in one. Could humanity survive a similar catastrophe? Perhaps it's a question best left unanswered.